the federal government's unveiling of what may be the most sweeping welfare adjustment in recent public service history, where they've raised allowances, expanded benefits, and introduced a 100% exit package for retiring civil servants. From the tutor allowance to esticles and book grants, the reforms cut across all grade levels under the comps and conrise structures, with officials insisting the move will boost morale and productivity in the workforce strained by rising living costs. With inflation still biting and government revenues under pressure, critical questions remain: is this a sustainable reform or a politically convenient intervention? Will it truly translate into better performance and accountability in the civil service, or simply increase the wage bill without structural change? The head of service today made an announcement. Mrs. Didi Walsing Jack announced that the federal government has approved a sweeping increase in peculiar allowances and other welfare benefits for civil servants in a move aimed at improving take-home pay and boosting morale across the public service. So let's get some insight into this matter, and let's speak with one man who knows so well the workings of the civil service and what this could mean for civil servants in Nigeria who are working at a federal level. I'm being joined by Dr. Joe Abah, who is a public policy expert and a former DG of the BPSR. Thanks so much, Doc, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me, Sean.
I appreciate the time, Doc. Give us an understanding. This looked like a long time coming, and a lot of people may not see also this happening at this time, because we're talking about inflation in our economy. We're talking about government saying there is so much to be done on infrastructure, but tackling the issue of welfare seems to be what has taken the government's attention at this time. Did you see this coming, though?
I did see it coming, because the head of the civil service of the Federation, Mrs. Esther Didi Walsing Jack, has demonstrated time and time again that she's deeply committed to the welfare of civil servants, and not just civil servants at the upper echelon of the service, everyone. And so it was announced earlier this year that an exit allowance will be given. It's not the old gratuity as it was before, but at least, civil servants will get 100% of their gross annual pay when they're leaving the service. That had not been the case for nearly 20 years. People just retired basically into poverty, and you found a lot of civil servants dying shortly after they retired. They had nothing to go home with. You then have the issue of housing, and what scares civil servants the most is retiring without having a house to their name, whether in the city or in their villages. So the head of service had been deeply committed to this for quite a while, and there's a federal government staff housing loans board which is supposed to disburse loans to civil servants, so at least enable them get a property anywhere, even if it's a one-bedroom house in their village that they can retire to. But that loan board has not been funded for very many years now. So you've had civil servants on the queue for very many years who haven't been able to get any sort of loans to buy houses at preferential rates. And you're right. So, when I was DG, we did a review of all the reforms that happened from 1999 to 2014. We published that report in 2015, more than 10 years ago. And he was saying exactly that. The recommendations he was making was that we should review the monetization policy we should review the pay and allowances of civil servants. So yes, it has been a long time coming, and this new initiative whereby the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria would basically, pay to the federal government staff housing loans about 10 billion naira to disburse to civil servants is very, very welcome news. Like I said, many civil servants just want a roof over their heads. They're not looking for mansions. Many will be perfectly happy to retire to a two-bedroom bungalow, a three-bedroom bungalow with their families. And this facility coming from the Federal Mortgage Bank is coming at a single-digit interest, I think only about 6% or so. And so this will solve a major problem that was created when the government did the monetization policy and the sale of in 2003 and the sale of government houses in 2005 to 2007. Because what that did was that properties that were known as official quarters for civil servants were all sold. And of course, civil servants couldn't afford to pay, they still cannot afford to pay commercial rents in the city. So many moved to Suleja, Yanya, Kefi, and we're spending everything they were getting basically on transportation because they simply could not afford to live in the city. So it's very, very welcome news, in my opinion, and I really commend the head of service for all our efforts to get this through, and commend the president and the cabinet for approving it.
Quite interesting. As someone who has led reforms in the Nigerian federal government, and you serving as the Director General of Bureau for Public Reform Service, you will understand what this means. Dr. Abah, would you describe these as perhaps the most far-reaching policy made by any federal government in recent time as far as welfare is concerned?
It's difficult for me to make that comparison, particularly not having studied the issues. I'm always careful with saying something is the most or the least or the worst, because you could also argue that the increase in minimum wage was quite monumental as well, because certain classes of officers were not earning enough to even bring them to work. Never mind welfare; they were not earning enough to be able to afford to come to work. So, but this is certainly quite significant, because it addresses a number of issues. Like I said, the issue of living service with no gratuity of any sort. We have passed an Employee Compensation Act since 2010, which is your normal workman's compensation or work person's compensation, which says that when someone is injured at work or dies at work, separate from the group life assurance. But if someone gets a serious injury at work, at least government should pay some compensation for that. And we passed that act since 2010, but nobody has implemented it. So that coming in right now is quite monumental. The same thing with all of the allowances, duty tour allowance. In some cases, a civil servant on grade level 8 or 9 could get a duty tour allowance of 12,000, 15,000. And if they're working out of station, they're supposed to find a hotel for that amount. They're supposed to transport themselves to a training for that amount. They're supposed to feed from that amount. So it was completely nonsensical. And I'm really pleased that these major reforms have now been undertaken. There are a number of other things that we need to be careful about in managing, but I think for the majority of civil servants, this will be very welcome news.
So, there are a few things that are far-reaching, and what the policy and the implication of the policy is a sweeping one, and it's not one thing. You're talking about exit benefit scheme. So it's not only those who are serving, it's also those who are retiring and the kind of benefit that goes to them. Exit benefit scheme, the employee compensation scheme, the 100% duty to allowance for training, the review and increase in peculiar allowance, a 10 billion naira housing loan scheme for these public servants. It's sweeping and far-reaching. I've been in the civil service before, so I understand what this could mean directly or indirectly into the pocket. But look, Dr. Abah, the implication of this is for me is also whether or not this will go beyond an approval. Is an approval from the federal government. Implementation is another thing. Whether this will be an immediate implementation, but you know better that when the president makes an approval of this nature, how quickly does implementation happen?
Well, a number of the reforms were to take effect in January this year, I believe. How quickly does it happen? I believe, I'm informed that it was already a provision for it was already made in the 2026 budget. But of course, you and I know the issues that we still have major problems funding our budgets. Some capital projects from 2024 have still not been funded. Some from 2025 have not been funded. So we're sort of running three budgets that are underfunded, although the government had gone to consolidate those commitments into one. But while those concerns are absolutely valid and well placed, you'll agree with me that what tends to be funded are issues of a personnel nature. So yes, the capital budget may be very poorly funded at 30% or 40% or usually when we're lucky about 50%. But the personnel budget tends to be funded 100%. And so that's what gives me some hope that this would be implemented. But having said that, all ministries are facing challenges with releases, that they're facing challenges with payment of overhead. Salaries are being paid, but overheads and benefits are suffering. But I also think that coming at this time, a few months before the elections, I suspect that the politicians would want to gain some electoral benefit from it, because there'll be a lot of unhappy civil servants who, if they don't get these benefits before the next elections, and civil servants tend to go out to vote.
I think that, this is a masterclass policy for politics that I will imagine, Dr. Abah. If I were President Bola Tinubu, I probably would do the same. Very strategic. If you're doing this before an election, it means something. And let me tell Nigerians what this means. As far as public perception, sentiment within the public and the civil service sector, what it means. Nigeria, as of 2022, says, indication from the Bureau of Public Service Reform says that there are about 720,000 public servants. In the total federal workforce, it's about 720,000 public servants. And other reports estimated that the federal civil service has about 89,000, though it's often represent only a subset of total federal employees. There are a lot of explanation to perhaps the differences between a public servant, a civil servant, and appointed, elected, and all whatnot. But that number is substantial, which I'm coming to the point. If you have 720,000 public servants, it means that averagely they are married. Let's assume that 500,000 of that number is married. I have an average of 2 children. It then means that double that number, you're talking about 1.5 to 2 million people that could directly be impacted or indirectly because of family and household. But for the optics, political optics, how smart do you think this decision is? Whether or not, and I'm coming to the monetary and economic implication of this decision, but I think that for whoever that has advised this president in terms of timing, what would be your assessment of that decision, Dr. Abah?
Well, so as you know, I have no competence in issues of politics, which is why I'm hardly ever on your show, except when we're talking about the technical elements of it. But I have seen a study that says that each civil servant supports between 20 or 30 people, and like I said, the civil servants tend to vote. The civil servants tend to have quite a bit of respect within the community, and their voices are listened to. But for me, the politicians would always be politicians. But if by playing their politics, the citizenry can get a benefit, I would take that benefit, because, like I said, these are a group of people who I'm not aware they've gone on strike over pay for at least 20 years. I'm not aware that they have. They do the work, they don't complain, they work very long hours, they get accused of all sorts, people have all sorts of myths about them. Oh, all the houses in Abuja are owned by civil servants. People make up all sorts of myths. And because they are not allowed to answer back, those perceptions persist. But I know that the average civil servant, even the permanent secretaries, are one crisis away from problems. I've seen director level civil servants who could not afford to pay for, cesarean operations for their wives, could not afford to repair their homes if the roof is damaged by a strong wind. And these are people who dedicate their lives to making sure that the country functions. So anything that, and it's different from there. Of course, there are a number of corrupt civil servants, particularly those in the accounting functions. But I can tell you one thing, that a civil servant can work for 35 years and not handle 1 million naira in their hand. So people look at the few bad eggs and use it to generalize, for everybody. So anything that improves the lives of this very dedicated, very patriotic group of people, I would always welcome it.
Let's look at the implication, Doc, in terms of monetary value to the budget. I'm not sure how much of the provisions of this is made in the 2026 budget, which is my big fear, because the total personnel cost in the 2026 budget, the figures shows that we have, and the salaries and pensions are projected about 10.75 trillion, overhead costs in the 2027 budget are about 2.22 trillion, and for service-wide vote, 1.70 trillion is set aside for outstanding liabilities. And the call circular indicates that 2026 promotion will be managed under a service-wide vote rather than individual MDAs. These figures and these details that I've just read out will imply whether there will be upward review of what these figures mean, because it was 58 trillion that the executive presented in the National Assembly, but when the budget came back to the president for his assent, it was 68 trillion. That's about almost 10 trillion that was jacked up in the process when the National Assembly were approving the appropriation bill. Give us an understanding in terms of inflation, the Tinubunomics, the economic policy and direction of this government. How far-reaching do you think this would mean to the federal purse and the national economy? Once you increase and you put much money into the pocket of civil servants in terms of their purchasing power, in terms of inflationary effect, what is your analysis of that policy? It's a single policy, but it has a far-reaching effect.
Thank you, Cyril. So my understanding is that provision was made in the 2026 budget, but I don't know that for a fact that these changes were anticipated and budgeted for in the 2026 budget. But let's be perfectly frank. Our budgeting system has regressed. There's no doubt about that, to my mind. Our budgeting system has regressed. We are over budgeting based, we're putting in figures without the revenues to back those figures. And I remember the executive chairman of the Nigerian Revenue Service appearing before the National Assembly and saying something like, we're using 1 year's revenue to fund a 3-year budget. That should never be the case. That is actually, to my mind, very poor budgeting. So it is an issue. There's no doubt about that. But what this is a bit different from the Udoji Award. The Udoji Award basically gave pay rises and also recommended a number of other things. It recommended payment by results. It recommended program-based budgeting. It recommended very many things that in 1974 that a number of management consultants are still, practicing today. Payment by objectives, linking budgets to performance. All of those wonderful things was recommended by the Udoji report in 1974. And then the Udoji report said this thing needs to be phased, right? And like I said, it tried to tie remuneration to performance and talked about the need to phase in some of these changes to manage inflation. The military government of the day threw out all of the technical recommendations, just gave a big increase to everybody, didn't phase it through, and of course that led to an immediate spike in inflation. This is very different. This is about, okay, when you're leaving the service, you get something. It's not many people. It's not tens of thousands that will leave the service every year. When you go on a training, you get maybe 50,000 instead of 12,000, or instead of 25. I think it was 30,000 the latest. But at least within that 50,000, you can find a cheap hotel that you can lay your head out. You can eat something. You can transport yourself to the place. But if you don't go on a training, you don't go on a tour, you don't get that duty tour allowance. You only get the extra code if you travel. And the travel, you can only travel if it's approved by the secretary to government and or the head of service. So it's not a pay rise. It's not a pay rise. If you get injured at work, you get the employee compensation. It's not, if you don't get injured, you don't get it. So this is just a cushioning of the effects. It's not a massive pay rise that should lead to a spike in inflation, to my mind.
Finally, Doc, in my mind is that there are budget deficits. There are more borrowings. And my fear about some of this policy is once the mainstay of our revenue, oil in this time around fluctuate. You see what happened with Russia and Ukraine. You see the war with Iran, Israel, and the USA, and just the Strait of Hormuz and that bottleneck, what it meant for world politics and oil and gas. It means a lot. Anything go up. It's a very fluid and very dynamic system. But with higher allowances, and all of these policies that are being made, whether or not the fiscal aspect of the government policies and direction can be sustained, and whether this will not down the road cause more strain. Is it realistic? Is our economy a reflection of a realistic tendency? Don't forget, the reality of our economy over the last 30 years or so is that we've lived a rent economy at the federal level for far too long. And we are not seeing the reality, and that's why our FX windows and a lot of the aspects of our economy are not the true reflection of the livelihood and the spending capacity of the people and its government. The biggest fear here, Doc, is the sustainability. Do you have that fear too?
I do have that fear because, to my mind, the government needs to do a duality of things. I think the current government is running a very large government. Some people believe in large government, some people believe in slimmer governments. But if you're going to run a large government, there are certain things you need to do. You need to raise revenue, and you need to cut waste. Okay, so there's quite a lot being done to raise revenue. We've had the new tax acts. We've had a refocusing of FRS into the NRS. People are now beginning to look at cost of collections and all of those things. So there are some efforts being made to raise revenue. But I do not believe that similar efforts are being made to cut waste. We still have far too many agencies. We're still not doing anything with the Orosari reports, despite all the big announcements more than a year ago. Not much has happened on it. We still have, I believe, the largest cabinet we've ever had in our history. We're still creating new agencies every day, although I read a few months ago a moratorium on establishing new universities, new federal universities and educational institutions, which is a step in the right direction. But I've always said that my formula is for every new thing you establish, you should close 5 that are existing. So I think we still need to do a lot more to cut down on waste. That duality of reduce waste and increase income is is the formula that I believe can make it sustainable. Right now, we're only standing on one leg, or we're trying to stand on one leg, the increase in revenue aspect. We need to stand on the other leg and cut waste and unnecessary spending.
Azemwa, Dr. Joe Abah. That's the social media Zaddy. I don't know if you're Zaddy or yeah. But thank you, Dr. Joe Abah. But we will appoint you the Federal Minister on Cutting Cost of Governance so that we can. The irony of it is that you said the cabinet is too large, but we still appoint you as the minister to help us look at how to cut cost of governance. Well, many thanks, Dr.
And the first thing I'll do will be to cut my own position.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time on the program tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.